I don't know if you're familiar with this thing. It's a philosophical exercise. You might have taken it in a sociology or philosophy class in college if you took one of those. But it's called the lifeboat dilemma. The lifeboat dilemma kind of goes like this. You imagine a boat out on the ocean that has hit an iceberg or run into some trouble, and the boat's going to sink. And you have a lifeboat, but there's not enough room in the lifeboat for everyone who's on the bigger ship. Okay, so you can make the numbers whatever you want. You can say there are 10 people and only 5 spots in the lifeboat. For sake of our understanding this morning, we've got a lifeboat that holds 4 people, and there are 5 people who need to be saved. And if you put 5 people in the lifeboat, they all die. Okay? So you can only save 4 people. And in the lifeboat dilemma, you then describe what these people are like. So for example, person number 1 is a single mother of 2. She does not work, but collects support from local agencies to take care of her kids. Is she worth saving? Person number 2 is a brain surgeon. She's a complete jerk that nobody likes, but she saves a lot of lives. Is she worth saving? Person number 3 is a fireman. He also saves lives, but he's a little more replaceable than the brain surgeon. He's divorced twice and has 2 kids he doesn't take care of. Is he worth saving? Person 4 is a pastor at the local church. He has a wife and 3 kids. He's definitely worth saving. Person number 5 is a famous musician. She's worth millions of dollars, but gives hundreds of thousands of dollars away every year to clean water and to feed the hungry. Is she worth saving? And so you go through your list like that and you think, what makes someone worth a spot in the boat? Is it because they are a good family person and they take care of their kids? Does that make them worthy of a spot in the boat? Is it because they're successful in their career? They're very educated and good at what they do. Does that earn them a spot in the boat? Is it their good deeds, taking care of those in need, that makes them worthy of a spot in the boat? What is it that we value enough to go, this person is worth saving? And the reality is it doesn't matter what you answer. It says more about you than it does the dilemma, because as you answer the question, you find out what you think makes somebody matter. You find out what standards you use, what rules you use, what qualifications you use to determine how much somebody really matters in life. And I bring that up as we get started this morning because we're going to read a passage of Scripture where the disciples are having a conversation that by all accounts is probably the conversation they had more than any other. We have multiple occasions of them having this exact disagreement. Who matters the most? Who is the greatest? Who is the one who really matters in God's kingdom? And the reason I think it's important for us as we kind of begin this study this morning is because I'm convinced that many of us live our lives with the sole focus of proving we are worthy of a spot in the boat. We spend our lives trying to make sure people know that we matter. Look at the family that I've raised. Look at how successful I am. Look at how generous I am. Look at how much service I perform. Look at what I have done. Aren't I worthy? Don't I deserve a spot in the boat? And as we pick up reading about the disciples here in Matthew chapter 9, they're having the exact same conversation that so many of us have, at least internally, within our own minds. This is what it says in Mark chapter 9, verse 33. Then they came to Capernaum. And when he was in the house, he, Jesus, asked them, "What were you arguing about on the way?" But they were silent because on the way they had been arguing with one another about who was the greatest. Okay, just a little irony here. They had seen Jesus know what people was thinking dozens of times already in the story. Constantly, Jesus is like, and then Jesus knew what the Pharisees were thinking. And then Jesus knew, but they're like, shh, don't tell him, he'll never figure it out. Slow learners. Of course, Jesus knows what they were talking about. And so sitting down, he called the 12 and said to them, "If anyone wants to be first, he must be last of all and servant of all." And then he took a child and had him stand among them, and taking him in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one little child, such as this, in my name, welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but him who sent me." So they're on their way to Capernaum, and they're having this conversation, this argument, this disagreement about who is the greatest. Again, it's a conversation we know that at least 4 different times they had because the circumstances are different, including at the Last Supper, hours before Jesus goes to the cross. They're arguing about who is the greatest. It's probably that argument that inspires Jesus to go pick up a bucket of water and wash their feet. And so you can just imagine how the conversation goes. If you were having that argument with someone here today, you might talk about who's done the most. Well, when we went out 2 by 2, I had more conversions than you did, John. That means I'm a better preacher than you. I'm the greatest. Or who has more experience. I was the first one he called. It must be me. I'm the most important. I've been here longer than the rest of you. You wouldn't even know Jesus if I hadn't come to get you. Or I'm the youngest. That means I'm like a prodigy, All you old fogies out there, he called me when I was only like 17. I must be really special. Each appealing to their strengths or their accomplishments or their identity to prove their greatness. And then Jesus pulling them aside and explaining to them what greatness really looks like. I think in this particular instance, we can understand their disagreement based on looking at the broader context of the story. I've used a phrase with you before, the Markan sandwich, that Mark likes to tell a story and he likes to insert another thing right in the middle of it. And the thing that goes in the middle helps you understand what's going on the outside. And on either side of this story is a kind of continuous piece about demon possession and the power to cast out demons, which is a weird thing to talk about, but it's what's there. So right before this story, last week when we left off, Jesus is coming down from the Mount of Transfiguration with his disciples. They get to the bottom of the mountain, and there's this boy who's demon possessed. And the demon is throwing him on the ground, and he's foaming at the mouth. He's having seizures. And the disciples have been unable to heal him, unable to cast out the demon. And Jesus almost kind of rebukes them. He comes to them and he casts the demon out, and he looks at his disciples and goes, listen, this kind only comes out through prayer. Meaning, you dum-dums, why didn't you ask God to help you? That's code loose Josh translation from the Greek there. Dum-dum from the Greek, dumos. It's not true at all. But he kind of rebukes them like, you guys, if you couldn't do it on your own authority, why didn't you ask the Father for help? Why were you trying to do this all on your own? What were you trying to prove? And so they have this kind of failure as the followers of Jesus. And let me just tell you, nothing brings out people's desire to prove themselves quite like failure. Now, I'm going to say some things here, and I need you to know, I promise I'm not talking about any of you particularly. I'm just telling you what I've seen and what the scriptures teach. It has been my experience that the people who brag the most are the most insecure. The people who feel the need to seek everyone's approval are often doing so because they don't feel like they're good enough. I know of at least 2 examples, not anyone in this room, of people who very recently have begun, if you watch their social media profile, you'd think, man, they have the best marriage in the world. They're constantly posting about their date nights and how wonderful their spouse is, and look at the beauty that God gets. I mean, every other post is this sappy, romantic thing. But because I know them, I know that their marriages are actually falling apart. Because I've been counseling some of them. And I know that there's a brokenness there that they feel the need to prove isn't there by advertising. And part of the reason we want to put our accomplishments out there, look at this award I've won, look at how awesome my kid is, look at how successful they are, look at what we've done, look at this trip that we've taken, is we're trying to prove to anybody who's watching, I matter. I'm worth something. Look at me. Look at all that I've accomplished. Look at how special I am. And social media has made that so easy for us to promote this brand of who we are. And often it's hiding a deep insecurity in here, that we're not sure we really matter. We're not sure anybody would pick us to stay in the boat. We're not sure we're good enough. And so we have to prove it to everybody else. And so right before this conversation where the disciples are arguing about this greatness and who really matters, they've just had this failure, this inability to do something that Jesus had said, you have the power to do. And nothing brings out our insecurity and our need to prove how much we matter like a failure. Because we don't want to be a failure. We don't want to be a screw up. We don't want to be insignificant. We want to be important. So the disciples begin to argue about their own greatness. On the other side of this story, on the other side of this argument, is this command or this other story about demon possession. The disciples come to Jesus and they say, Jesus, there are some other people over there, and they're casting out demons in your name, but they're not one of us. Go tell them to stop. I want you to think about that for a minute. Here is the disciple saying, there are people who are demon possessed, who are being healed. Go stop them. There's some backwards thinking there, right? The idea that you want to stop somebody who's helping others. But if failure brings out our insecurity, the other thing that brings out our insecurity just as much is the success of other people. Well, that could be me. They're not actually better than me. They didn't do anything. I remember the first time it ever came out of my mouth that I remember. I was like 20 years old and we were on this mission trip in Pittsburgh. And I'd shown up with like 11 or 12 kids and was feeling pretty good about the group that we'd taken. And this other church that was there, he brought like 65 students. Okay? And I'll just be honest, I was feeling a little insecure. Because honestly, I couldn't figure out what this guy was doing because he wasn't very good at, he was kind of a jerk. He yelled at his kids all the time. He spoke during our evening sessions. I was a much better preacher than he was. At that time, I had better hair than he did. He was so disorganized, it drove me bonkers. And I could not, so I started rationalizing, well, he must, he comes from a bigger church, and so they're just coming because all those families are at the church, and he's probably got a great children's ministry, and so he's got all these kids that are being fed into his, there's no way he's actually better at this than me. Because nothing brings out our insecurity like the success of others. And there are guys in my position now, so, my church would be growing more if we were in a bigger city. If we had a better worship band, if we had more lights, if we had better technology, if we were in a growing area. It can't be me. It's got to be something else. Because I matter, and I'm good, and I'm valuable, and I'm important, so it can't be me. It's got to be something else. And nothing brings out our insecurity like our own failure or the success of other people. And both cause us to feel like we have to prove something to the world around us. And so right in the middle of these two stories, the hamburger of our Markan sandwich, is Jesus sitting down with his disciples and telling them what really matters in life. Let's read it again. Mark chapter 9, verse 35. Sitting down, he called the 12, and he said to them, if anyone wants to be first, he must be last of all and servant of all. I want to note something particularly important about this passage. Jesus does not tell them to stop pursuing being first. He doesn't tell them to become wet wash rags who lie around and do nothing of significance. He doesn't tell them to become lazy and stop aspiring for greatness. He doesn't tell them to stop trying to do things that matter. He simply tells them how to actually matter. He tells them what the rules are for being first in the kingdom of heaven. And Candace and I play a lot of board games and card games, and I'm going to tell you, maybe my least favorite game of all time is this game called Flux. Okay? If you've never played Flux, here are the rules of the game. The rules change the whole time. So you're collecting things and trying to win, but as you draw these cards, like every third card is a card that changes the rules of the game. So it changes how many cards you can have in your hand. It changes what you need to win. It changes whether or not you can steal cards from your opponent. So you'll be like collecting all the ingredients for chocolate chip cookies. That's a real part of the game. And you think if I get all the ingredients for chocolate chip cookies, I'll win. And then somebody lays a card that's like, now the rules are if your opponent has all the ingredients for chocolate chip cookies, then you win. So now all these things I've collected are going to help my opponent win. So I start giving them away. And then somebody changes the rules and I need my chocolate chips back. And the whole game is constant rule changing and it drives me bonkers. How are you supposed to plan and strategize and think 7 steps ahead when the rules are going to change on the next turn? Jesus here in Mark 9 does not tell his followers, hey, don't play to win. It's not what he says. Don't strive for greatness. That's not what he says. What he says is the rules are different than you thought they were. The path to greatness is not through vocational achievement. The path to greatness is not through the recognition of other people. The path to greatness is not how many friends you have or how many people like you. The path to greatness is not how much money is in your bank account. The path to greatness is not how many people recognize what you've done. The path to greatness, he who shall be first will choose to be last. He will become the servant of all. That is the path to greatness in the kingdom of heaven. What's that look like practically and tangibly? It's life-altering. It is counter to everything our culture holds high. Can I just tell you that in my 20 or so years working in the church, the vast majority of disagreements and problems we've had would be solved if we understood this verse. I don't know if you know this about me. I can be snarky from time to time. Did you know that about me? I've been known to say things probably when I shouldn't. I've had conversations with people where they say things like, well, we're not coming there anymore because we're not being fed. And I've asked them, I said, well, who have you been feeding? And they just kind of stare at you. And I show them this verse and I go, wait a minute. You're telling me that you think you come to church so that you can get something. But Jesus says if you're a follower of Christ, you come to church so you can serve other people. So who are you feeding? Well, they stopped planning the activities that are good for my family. There's really nothing for my kids to go to or nothing for me to go to. And I don't feel like I fit in belong there. And I just kind of look at people and go, what activities have you been leading? Well, I was sick and I missed like a month and nobody but the preacher called me or came to visit me and I just felt like nobody cared about me. And so then I'll pull out my list and go, which of these people on our prayer list have you called recently? Because our mindset, even in the church, is that we come to church for what we get. We come to church so people will feed us, so people will serve us, so they'll plan activities for us, so they'll care about us when we're gone. And I'm just asking if Matthew 9 is correct, and those who are first in the kingdom are those who choose to be servant of all, who have you been serving? Who have you been calling? Who have you been feeding? Who have you been planning things for? Who have you been checking on? Whose grass have you been mowing? Whose thing have you been carrying? What have you done as a servant for those around you? Because that is the call to discipleship. Church membership is a call to be fed. By the way, Jesus doesn't talk about church membership. Jesus talks about discipleship. Discipleship is a call to serve. Church attendance is about what I can get. Discipleship is about what I have to offer. And when you get that the Jesus we are following gave everything he had to give up to and including his own life. Yes, it's Memorial Day weekend. Yes, tomorrow we're going to go to cemeteries and we're going to put flags and we're going to remember those who gave everything they had to give so that others might have freedom. And I just always feel like it's worth pointing out this one thing. They went knowing there was a chance they could die and they were willing to take the risk. Jesus came knowing he was going to die. There was no risk, there was a plan. And he chose to come anyway and gave everything he had to give willingly and freely and then says, follow me. Pick up your cross and live the way I lived. Become a servant to all. This is the path of discipleship. And anything short of that is just church attendance. And so which one do you want? You want to be a church attender? You want to be a follower of Jesus? You want to show up and be fed and have people take care of you? Or do you want to be a servant to all? Jesus says the path to greatness is by choosing to serve those around you. This, by the way, is not just about the church. This will change your family. Imagine what your family would look like if everybody in your family made it their mission to serve everybody else to the best of their ability. As a husband and wife, as a father and children, as a grandparent and grandchildren, that my life is about serving you. This will change your workplace. Imagine if everybody, instead of doing what was best for them, did what was best for those around them. What a beautiful work environment that would be. Some of you are like, yeah, that would, if you only knew what my work environment was like. Yeah, because it's marked by selfishness and people trying to get ahead. It'll change every single area of your life because you make this one decision. I am no longer worried about my place in the boat. I'm worried about making sure everybody else gets in safely. And whatever happens to me happens because my life is in the hands of my Savior. I don't have to validate myself. I don't have to prove I matter. I don't have to earn anybody's approval. I am the beloved Son of God, adopted into his family, saved for all eternity, his precious possession. I matter because he says I matter. I don't have to prove anything to anybody. And it frees me up to put others before myself. So we're going to sing a song here for closing that invites God to make that change in our hearts, to make us into those who serve the people around us, that causes us to focus on them rather than us, because we don't have anything to prove. So I invite you to sing this song with us as a continuation of the prayer I'm going to pray over you right now. God, this concept is simple to explain and so difficult to live. For in us there is a great deal of insecurity, a great deal of ego, a great deal of selfishness at times. And so, God, we come to this song and we sing these words as a prayer, that you would make us into servants, that you would make us like you, that we would be more than just those who attend church. We would be true disciples. The path of discipleship is to follow Jesus, and Jesus gave everything he had for those around him. May we learn to live like that, giving of our time and our money and our resources and our gifts to serve those in our family and our community, at our work, and in our church. God, humble our hearts. Make us servants. May we find greatness in the kingdom by serving the way Jesus did. God, we sing this song as a prayer. In your Son's name, amen. Watch you stand.